welcome back to another edition of the Slipstream Podcast. You got the full crew in here, Cole Trickle Jr., Austin, Brady, and Matt. Tonight, we're going to break down McLaren, kind of where they went through the whole season. It's been an up and down year for them. They kind of started, we had high expectations for where they were going to go, and then Bahrain, they kind of had some brake issues, started slow, a lot to dig into. So why don't we get into 2022, early season, high hopes McLaren. Brady, where do you think they were going to finish at the beginning of the year? Because we all thought they had big things.
Yeah, if I look back at 2022, I don't know if they're my biggest disappointment for last year. And a little bit that's unfair. I mean, Lando was great. Lando was Lando. He performed as he always does, maybe overachieved in that vehicle. We talked about this a lot last season. Daniel Ricciardo didn't perform. I mean, without beating around the bush too much, I mean, he just was well behind Lando pretty consistently. I mean, there were plenty of times where Lando would get into Q3 and Danny Ric is stuck in P17. So, playing the partnership, the team game, McLaren suffered maybe as bad as anyone in that department last year. They finished fifth, only, I think, 15 points behind Alpine in fourth. And it just makes you think that they would have easily gotten fourth if Daniel Ricciardo was a little bit better. So, yeah, I don't know if they're my overall biggest disappointment for last year. But, yeah, we always think McLaren coming off a recent third place in 2020, we had a little bit higher hopes than fifth. At least I did.
I agree with you. I do think that we had the most exciting driver pairing, or at least the most likable driver pairing coming into the season with Lando and Daniel Ricciardo. So, yeah, I know for me, I would say that they were probably, obviously, I'm a big McLaren fan. They were my biggest disappointing team for what I thought they were going to finish to where they actually finished.
Yeah, and Matt, the data crunching a little bit here better than I am, but we talked about this towards the end of the season last year. If you just break down McLaren's points, Lando had 122, Danny Ric had 37. So that's 76% of the team's points, which I'm pretty sure was the largest discrepancy between two teammates, maybe other than Albon and Latifi.
The biggest gap was Alfa Romeo with Bottas and Zhou, but it is one of the largest discrepancies in history for a top 5 team, for a top 5 constructor. I think it's like the 5th or 6th largest discrepancy between two drivers in a top 5 constructor, which is, and I mean, it's incredible, especially when you think Danny Ric, who has had such success in the sport, just didn't have it this year for whatever reason, whether it was the car, age, whatnot. There's this hype with him going to Red Bull and as a reserve driver and this and that. And it's like he got his doors blown off by his teammate. And that hype going for him in the future seems too much. But then it's like, Lando, man, what a driver. Like, that guy is a fantastic driver in Formula One. He'll get his first win here soon, hopefully in 2023. So looking forward to it for him.
Cole, you made a good point earlier that we had the expectations, I guess, coming out of the first preseason testing in Spain. I think they were kind of on the back foot coming out of Bahrain the weekend before the race. And it's interesting that those two cars, had brake issues and started really far back. And I think they were the only team to do like the alternate strategy and just left the team out there, left the drivers out there. And they couldn't really put much together at all. So coming out of Bahrain, it felt like just an absolute dumpster fire. And Saudi Arabia was a little bit better. Lando finished 7th. Danny Ric DNF'd. But, then you have Australia and Imola that they haul in a collective like 40 points or so. Like, it was an amazing haul, and you feel like they righted the ship. But I don't really think that Danny ever, whether it came grips with the car, or felt comfortable or whatever. He just wasn't racing at the capability that he has. And, Matt, you had made the comment, like, is he getting too old or what's happening? Like, what is he, 33, 34? Like, he's not
washed. Excuse me.
He's not that old when you compare it to, the Seb, the Lewis, and even the Alonso. But I'm intrigued to see kind of where the team goes next year, and also with Ricciardo, kind of what he's able to do behind the scenes for Red Bull.
Let's just recap the last 5 years. McLaren, 2022 they finished 5th with 159. 2021 they finished 4th with 275 points. 2020 3rd with 202 points. 2019 4th with 145 points. In 2018 they were 6th with 62. So I think the best news for McLaren going into this year is that they have Lando Norris locked in through 2025. I know Zach Brown wants him there for the long haul. There's been lots of rumors and innuendo about, does Lando jump ship to one of the top teams? But for the next 3 seasons, at least, he's locked in with McLaren, which is great news for them because we're all Lando Norris fans and can't wait to see him get his first win and hopefully a championship in his career. So we know Daniel Ricciardo is out, which means Oscar Piastri is in, our boy Oski P. Lots of conversation around Oski P last season with the whole drama with him leaving Alpine and getting to McLaren and some lawsuits and whatnot going on. So, Cole, I know that you're sort of a big gossip guy. What do we know about Oscar Piastri, and what are your expectations for him this season?
There are high expectations, but he's a rookie in F1, so he's been a champion in pretty much everything he's ever touched. So fast forward, the drama, we could spend an entire podcast talking about Alpine and McLaren and how it all happened. But long story short is he was a Renault driver. He came up through the Renault Academy. He ended up testing for McLaren last season, and his contract ran out, and McLaren signed him kind of in the gray area that no one really knew about. So it shuffled the whole grid of how it was going to happen, of Fernando and Danny, Rick. Everybody shook out after that kind of move. So there are high expectations. Like I said before, I think that these two really have the most ability. I think these two have the most. You can build a team around these two. They're both really young. They have long futures ahead of them. McLaren is shooting for title contention by 2024. That's what they've been pitching. That's what they've been saying. So if they don't have it by then, I would expect for Lando to be looking elsewhere, because he is that kind of driver who could compete with a Max or a Lewis in equal equipment. But I think that they have the most promise looking forward of building a future out with Lando and Oscar.
Where would you see Lando going?
Well, that's another great question. He obviously talks with all the teams. He's come out and said he's talked with Red Bull, he's talked with multiple teams, but I do think that Audi will make a play to go after Lando. His old team principal is there now. He's made the move, so I think that he will try to make it. If Lando is not winning races by 2024, expect him out of Papaya Orange.
Yeah, Cole, you mentioned this, so I'm curious to go around the room. So, Stan, I'll start with you. We talked a little bit about Lando, obviously outkicking Danny Rick pretty successfully. How much do you think that is just Lando overachieving versus just Danny Rick not having it? Is he that much better than the car?
I don't know. It's hard to kind of compare those two guys. Danny Rick is an 8-time race winner, so he's been able to do it. He also did it at Monza, right? 2 years ago. It's like he's been able to win. Granted, Lando was told to not really push. So, there's a little bit there, but I don't know. I think, we had all last year we had talked about how Max was driving better than Sergio, and like the car is just more so catered to that driving style. I think with every driver, as they come into a new team, they have to kind of relearn how to drive the car. Danny's been in 2 different teams in 3 years. He's kind of been around a good bit. So I don't know if there's any type of maybe hangover or rust that may be lingering from the Renault or from the Red Bull days or not. But I think Lando's a great driver, but until we see him challenging, I don't know how much better he is than Ricciardo versus Ricciardo just falling off. It's kind of hard to nail that down.
Ricciardo definitely regressed. I mean, this past 2022 was his second season. He went from 8th place in the drivers with 115 points to I think it was 11th technically with only 37 points. So something changed, whether that's just, athletes, they hit a plateau and they start to fall off the other side, right? I mean, just because you've won 8 races doesn't mean you can still win races, right? Otherwise, there'd be a lot of people still in the sport. So, it does seem like Lando is definitely a very consistent driver. Matt, we always see him, every now and then peak up to P4 in qualifying, and then just the better cars get him on race day. So, Matt, I'm curious of your thoughts, and we can also go around the room on this one. If Lando was in a top 2 constructor, do you think he could win a world championship? Do you think he's that talented?
Yes. I think if he was in one of those top 2, top 3, if Mercedes put together what they did in the last 10 to 12 races for the whole season, Lando was 42.5 points above his team's average for points. The only driver that was higher than that was Max Verstappen, in the sense of if you want to talk about driver versus their team versus their car, right? So if the output was so many points for the constructor, Lando was 42.5 over, Max was 74.5. So if you look at it that way, I think Lando's a top 3 to 4 talent driver on the track. I think if you put any of those top 4 guys in a top 2 car, they're competing year in and year out. So yes, if he was on Red Bull, if he was on Ferrari, if he was on Mercedes, he has not guaranteed, but he has a very good shot of competing.
Sid, what do you think? Do you think he's world championship talent?
I don't know. We'll wait and see.
Well, I know you're a big Lando Norris fan, so what are your thoughts here?
All day, 100% yes. Put him in equal equipment. I think he can give Max a run for his money. I'm not saying he's better than Max Verstappen. I'm not saying he's better than Lewis Hamilton. But if you put him in, he used to beat George Russell growing up karting. So he has speed. Again, Helmut has reached out to him, and they've had multiple conversations, and he always seems to sign. They said he always seems to sign with McLaren the day after they talk with Red Bull. So obviously teams see speed in him. He's Mr. Consistent. I mean, he outperforms his teammate so far consistently. I think he averaged 8th qualifying and Danny Rick averaged 12th qualifying. I mean, in fairly similar equipment, you shouldn't be that far off the pace. So again, yeah, I think Lando Norris has potential to be a world champion. I think he will become a world champion if they continue to stay on pace the way that they're supposed to. Oscar Piastri brings great experience to the table. Hopefully his rookie season is not super rusty, but between the two of them, I do think they could be in the best of the rest conversation.
Brady, I think you made the point about where the talent was he would consistently qualify pretty high up in races. So he's got the talent to get a 1 lap out of a car that probably shouldn't get that out of it, right? So eventually over 60 laps, 50 laps, 70 laps, the car just can't take it, right? It's just a law of averages. Eventually it's just going to get run down. But if you can put him in a car that can do that consistently, we already see what he can do out of a worse car. I think you would see him excel in a top constructor.
So revisiting something that you said, Brady, you said that Ricciardo was 8th in the championship in his first year in McLaren. He did have a win. If you take that win out of it, not saying that you can, but if you take that one win out, he finished with 88 points, 7 points ahead of Alonso for 10th place. So he really
still 50 more points than he had last year, though.
Yeah, I mean, I think the points were a little bit more skewed. Like if you look at the ratio between 21 and 22, but like if you remove the Monza win, he's the 10th, 11th kind of guy. So he didn't really have that much of a fall off. I think just there was so much consumption of points at the top end that I think most of the grid probably dropped down, substantially.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think McLaren. Well, I'll answer my own question first. I think Lando is world championship talent. Whether that happens in McLaren or another constructor, I think is to be determined. Cole, as you said at the beginning of the podcast, I'm not sure how long his patience will be. I mean, the reality is he has 3 more seasons with McLaren. So unless he's figuring out a way to get out of that early, he's got to hope that they can become championship material in the next 3 years. Otherwise, yeah, I think he'll move on to hopefully, better pastures. Yeah, I do think looking at this season, while I know Oscar Piastri is a rookie and there will probably be some growing pains along his journey into Formula One, his success is amazing. He's only 21. He's a Formula 3 champion. He's a Formula 2 champion. I know Zach Brown says he's immensely talented, maybe one of the most talented drivers in the world. Of course, he's going to say that about his driver. A fun fact, though, is that Oski P joined Nico Rosberg, Lewis Hamilton, Nico Hulkenberg, Charles Leclerc, and George Russell as the only drivers to win in their rookie season of GP2 or F2. So it's pretty good company. A couple current drivers, a 7-time world champion in that list. So between Oscar Piastri being 21 and Lando Norris being 23, I mean, McLaren is set up for the future as long as they can get their car underneath them and give their guys a chance to win some races.
If you look at how, come back to Daniel Ricciardo for just a second. I want to say Alpine had 8 DNFs, and McLaren still they lost by 14 or 15 points. Kind of shows you how poorly Daniel Ricciardo. I mean, they had 8 DNFs, and they still couldn't close that gap. So hopefully Oscar can be a little more consistent for them, because. Yeah, that 8 DNFs, that's incredible.
Yes, I'm curious. Lando does not have a win in Formula One. We all know what happened in Russia a couple years ago. Unfortunately, we all thought he had it, and then he risked it a little bit too much. And I think every Formula One fan was sad when that happened. So, Sten, does Lando get a win in 2020?
I don't think so. I think they are 1 year away from that. I would say like long reach that they would get a win in 24. I don't know if unless something changed drastically, I don't know if they would have closed the gap that much. Otherwise, he would need to be pretty lucky and have 2 or 3, maybe 4 of the top 6 drivers in the top 3 teams have something unfortunate happen. But it could. I just don't think it's this year. I think it's probably 1 more year out.
Matt, is Lando getting a win this season?
Why not? I mean, Danny Rick got one because of luck a couple years back. It happens not often, but 1 to 2 times a year, there's a guy that can creep up and steal one. I think he is the top person to steal one.
Cole, win or no win?
I'm all in with Matt. I think that he of the people who could steal a win, he is kind of Mr. Consistent. He's always in that area knocking on the door. So I think if anybody can do it, obviously being a McLaren fan, I'm going to say yes. But I think if someone can sneak a win this season, it could be Lando. But I do think that they absolutely are winning races by 24. I don't know about championships, but they will be winning races in 24.
Yeah, for me, this is kind of the old debate between your head and your heart. My heart wants him to win this season, but my head doesn't think it's actually going to happen. I don't know if they did anything through the course of 2022 to make it seem like they're on that trajectory. So yeah, Cole, I think you might be right. We might be a year away. I hope we're wrong. I'd love for McLaren to surprise all of us this season. But I just don't know. I don't really know what to expect from McLaren this year. They're kind of my hardest one to predict. So speaking of predictions, I think McLaren's going to be anywhere from 4 to 6, maybe 3 if they get something right. But for some reason, my gut is saying they're going to end up 6th this season. I think Oscar Piastri may have some early season struggles. They do have a new team principal with Andreas Seidel moving on to Sauber Group. So they've got Andrea Stella moving in as the new team principal. So there just might be some early season growing pains, which might set them behind, sort of their midfield rivals. So I think by the end of the season, I think they'll be doing better with a lot of hope for 2024. But I think they might struggle early and finish 6th this season.
I'm going to say that they go 5th. I think they just kind of stay the same field. They have a little bit of growing pains with Oscar. Lando stays Mr. Consistent, but I think that Aston and Alpine come on strong this season, and I think they put up a real fight. I think that there are just lots of gaps that are closed in the midfield. So I think they're still fighting for 5th. I think they could get to 4th, but I don't think they're touching 3rd this season. I just don't think they have it. So, yeah, I'm going to go 5th this year.
I think I agree. I think they beat out Aston. It might not be a big margin, but you had said it earlier with Alpine's retirements. Like Fernando was the most unlucky guy last year. I think that if Alpine finishes more races, right? Like if they don't DNF for, 20% of the races that were raced, like they would have scored a lot more. So I don't think McLaren closes that gap this year. I'm all for McLaren 2024. But if you were to look at McLaren in the first race of 2022 versus now, saying like where could they be, it's a pretty big paradigm shift. Like they're looking on the up, but I don't think they're up yet.
I don't agree with any of y'all. We're going 4th, and I'm going to tell you why. First off, y'all said growing pains with Oski P. Not going to deny that there won't be growing pains with Oski P. Danny Rick scored points in like 2 out of like the first 10 races. Like that's old growing pains, right? With that guy. So I feel like you can get more out of him. McLaren also only had 2 less DNFs than Alpine. So it wasn't like this huge gap where they only had like 2 DNFs. It was only 2 less. They also finished out of the 44 races between 2 drivers. They had 6 less races where they scored points because of Danny Rick. So they're getting a higher talent in there. It may take him a little bit, but though Danny Rick came on in those last 6 to 8 races, like I feel like Oski's going to give them more than that out of those races. They get more wind tunnel time than Alpine. They have, I don't want to say they were unlucky like Alpine, because Alpine was unlucky on the Fernando side. McLaren's unluckiness was talent with their second driver, and they've upgraded that. The car started to feel a little bit better towards the end. They had some momentum going into this year. I think they go 4th.
I like it. I mean, we've talked a little bit about this as we review all these midfield teams. One of these midfield teams is going to surprise somebody. If someone's going to, that's why they did these regulations and added the cost cap, right? Is to level the playing field. So in order for that to happen, the top and bottom's got to get closer together, or someone from the back or midfield is going to leap forward. So it could be McLaren. Maybe I hope it's McLaren. I just don't know if it will be McLaren. Before we wrap up, Cole, one thing that we haven't touched on yet, just a quick nugget, is Mick Schumacher has signed to also be a reserve driver for McLaren for 2023. So he's going to split reserve duties between Mercedes and McLaren. So good to see him sticking around in another paddock.
Could be like another Oscar Piastri situation. We'll never know. Schumacher could find another ride. McLaren, he could end up anywhere. So happy to see he's still on the grid or in the grid.
Yeah, so lots of excitement for McLaren this season. If they get the car right, I think they've got the driver talent to have a successful 2023. We're all, I think, rooting for a Lando Norris victory at some point. Whether that happens this year is to be determined. So as always, we're reviewing all the teams, 10th place through first place, getting you all prepared for the 2023 Formula One season. So that wraps up our McLaren season preview. Check us out on social media at the Slipstream F1 Pod on Instagram, TikTok, whatever your social media platform of choice. Give us any thoughts, comments, feedback, subscribe. We appreciate you listening, and we'll talk to you next time.